My name is Adela Garcia, and I am 32 years old. For 4 years, my parents told everyone in our hometown that I vanished without a trace. They stood in country club lobbies and cried about their missing daughter. The reality was much simpler. I just stopped paying their mortgage. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona now. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The house smelled of pine needles and wet acrylic paint. I was sitting on the floor of my living room with my daughter, Mia. We were painting a wooden birdhouse. She had blue paint on her nose, and for the first time in a long time, my chest felt light. Then the knock came. It was sharp and hurried. I wiped my hands on a rag, stood up, and opened my front door. My younger sister Brittany stood on the porch. She was 28, wearing designer sunglasses and holding a thick, cream-colored envelope against her chest like a shield. We had not spoken in 1,460 days. Brittany opened her mouth to speak, trying to construct a polite smile, but the words died in her throat. Her eyes drifted past my shoulder and into the hallway. She saw the bright pink plastic tricycle parked against the baseboard. Then her gaze crawled up the wall and stopped on the framed portrait of David, my late fiancé. A black funeral ribbon still hung over the corner of the silver frame. I watched the math work its way through my sister's head. The color drained from her cheeks until her skin looked like chalk. She did not ask about the little girl laughing in the living room. She did not ask how David died. She took a step back, her hands shaking as she pulled her phone from her purse and pressed it to her ear. "Mom, you need to see this. She never told us." Brittany did not finish the thought. She backed down the porch steps, tossed the cream envelope onto my patio chair, and hurried toward her SUV without looking back. What my family intended to do with that wedding invitation, and how I finally exposed their secrets in front of the exact people they were trying to impress, is the reason I am telling this story today. Welcome to Grape Vengeance, the place where we tell the truth about the families who underestimated us. If you are watching this, drop your age in the comments and let me know if you have ever had to walk away from people who only loved your wallet. Make sure to hit subscribe because you will want to see how this ends. I stood on the porch and listened to the sound of Brittany's tires kicking up gravel as she drove away. The mountain air felt suddenly cold. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy and expensive. My name was written on the front in calligraphy. I am a medical billing specialist. I spend 10 hours a day auditing claims, hunting down discrepancies, and finding the truth hidden inside the numbers. Numbers do not lie, but my parents do. I held the invitation in my hands and knew right then that my sister did not drive 2 hours up a mountain because she missed me. People who erase you do not come back to apologize. They come back because they need something they cannot afford. Mia tugged on the hem of my jeans, holding up her paintbrush. I looked down at my daughter, and then I looked at the picture of David on the wall. I promised him I would protect her from the people who took everything from me. I broke the wax seal on the envelope. The trap was set, but they had no idea who they were dealing with now. I ran my thumb over the thick paper of the wedding invitation. Seeing my sister sprint away from my porch unlocked a vault of memories I spent years trying to bury. To understand why Brittany looked at my hallway like she had seen a ghost, you have to understand the math of my past. 5 years ago, my reality looked entirely different. I was 27 years old, living inside a suffocating Phoenix apartment that smelled permanently of bleach and stale carpet. The air conditioning rattled loudly, spitting warm air into a bedroom that felt like a brick oven. I spent 60 hours a week sitting under fluorescent lights at a regional hospital. My job was auditing medical claims. I hunted down billing errors, tracked missing insurance payouts, and balanced corporate ledgers. I could spot a $50 discrepancy in a $2 million insurance payout from 3 states away. I held hospital executives accountable for mismanaged funds. Numbers never lied to me. I knew exactly how to make a spreadsheet balance. Yet my personal ledger was hemorrhaging constantly. Every single month, on the very first day, an automatic bank transfer pulled $2,200 out of my checking account. That sum did not travel into a savings fund. It did not go toward a down payment for my own future. It traveled directly into the primary checking account belonging to Patricia and Thomas Garcia. My parents lived 40 minutes north in Scottsdale. They occupied a sprawling 5-bedroom property boasting a 3-car garage and a backyard swimming pool lined with imported cerulean tiles. They spent their weekends drinking overpriced martinis at a local country club, boasting to their affluent friends about my father's brilliant real estate portfolio. They projected an image of effortless, upper-class superiority. The truth was an ugly, rotting secret. My father's portfolio had collapsed 6 years prior. His business ventures failed spectacularly. Instead of selling the large estate and downsizing to a manageable property, my mother had driven to my tiny apartment. She sat at my cheap kitchen table, buried her face in her hands, and wept. She claimed the humiliation of losing their social status would put my father in an early grave. She begged me to cover their mortgage temporarily until they got back on their feet. Temporary stretched into 72 agonizing months. 72 months of me writing the check for their luxury lifestyle. While Patricia and Thomas hosted lavish patio barbecues, serving prime rib to their neighbors, I sat on my scuffed linoleum floor, eating 90-cent instant noodles. I could not afford fresh produce. The final week of every month brought physical agony. My stomach would tie itself into painful knots. I suffered from tension headaches that blurred my vision. The dread of seeing my account balance plummet to single digits kept me awake until dawn. I drove a 15-year-old sedan with a deep fracture spiderwebbing across the windshield. During the brief Arizona winters, I shoved cardboard into the passenger window gap because the heater core was busted, and I lacked the $300 required to fix it. I was freezing in my own car on my way to a job that paid for my parents' heated pool. The bitterest pill to swallow involved my sister. Brittany remained entirely ignorant of the financial arrangement. Our parents demanded strict silence, claiming the shame would shatter the family dynamic. Consequently, Brittany operated under the firm delusion that our parents possessed endless wealth. The year I turned 26, Patricia and Thomas purchased a brand new luxury SUV for Brittany as a college graduation present. I recall standing in their paved driveway watching my younger sister squeal with delight as Thomas handed her a set of keys attached to a giant red bow. A sharp physical pain twisted my stomach. The hefty down payment for that vehicle originated from the exact same checking account where I deposited my grueling double-shift paychecks. I was quietly funding my sister's affluent lifestyle. Later that afternoon, Brittany actually complained about the rising cost of premium gasoline for her new engine, sighing dramatically about how hard it was to maintain a nice vehicle. I stood there, wearing scrub pants I bought on clearance 3 years prior, and nodded sympathetically while gripping the steering wheel of a car that shook violently whenever I merged onto the highway. The true breaking point of my silent endurance arrived during Thanksgiving dinner 3 years deep into the extortion. Patricia had spent 2 full days preparing a feast capable of feeding a small army. The wide oak dining table was buried under fine china crystal wine goblets and an enormous roasted turkey. Extended relatives filled the room, laughing loudly and drinking bottles of expensive imported wine. Thomas stood at the head of the table. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass, demanding the room's attention. He cleared his throat, puffed out his chest, and flashed his charismatic, winning smile. He raised his goblet and delivered a toast. He thanked God for his incredible success. He spoke at length regarding his keen eye for investments, his diligent financial planning, and how his tireless work ethic allowed him to provide such a magnificent home for his loved ones. My Uncle Robert patted Thomas on the back, praising his financial acumen, entirely ignorant that the man he admired was functionally bankrupt. Thomas looked directly across the table, met my gaze, and smiled warmly, taking full public credit for the roof over his head. At that precise second, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I slipped the device onto my lap beneath the tablecloth. The screen illuminated with a stark notification from my bank. It was an automated low balance alert. My checking account had plunged to $14.50. The annual property tax bill for the Scottsdale estate had cleared just hours earlier. I had transferred $4,000 to the county treasury so the government would not slap a tax lien on the very house my father currently bragged about owning. I sat motionless, staring at the glowing screen. I placed a piece of dry turkey into my mouth and chewed it like sawdust. I shifted my gaze toward my mother. Patricia caught my eye, delivered a tiny, tight-lipped nod, and immediately spun around to pour more Cabernet for my aunt. Her silent command was crystal clear. "Keep your mouth shut, Adela. Do not ruin the illusion." I existed merely as a ghost in my own family. I was nothing more than an invisible wallet, a pack mule, carrying the crushing weight of a burden I never asked for, deliberately tethered to poverty so they could pretend to be royalty. I genuinely believed I would carry that miserable burden forever. I assumed being a loyal daughter meant sacrificing my youth, my comfort, and my future to maintain their fragile pride. That grim mindset held firm until I met David. David worked as a physical therapist in the rehabilitation wing of the same hospital where I audited patient files. We crossed paths in the sterile employee break room over cups of stale black coffee. He possessed a kind demeanor, sharp observational skills, and a quiet, steady strength that made the relentless chaos of my existence feel momentarily manageable. We began spending our evenings together. We sat on my sagging thrift store couch, watching old movies, discussing our hopes, and building a quiet connection. David was incredibly intelligent. It did not take him long to notice the glaring discrepancies dominating my daily routine. He knew the standard salary band for hospital auditors. He knew I picked up extra shifts every weekend. Yet he also watched me duct tape the soles of my running shoes together before going for a walk. He noticed me constantly declining his dinner invitations, claiming I felt sick or had already eaten, when the harsh reality was my debit card would decline a $12 meal. One particular evening, while sitting in the sweltering heat of my apartment, David muted the television. He shifted his body to face me, his dark eyes filled with a deep, unsettling concern. He did not yell. He did not judge my frayed clothes or the empty refrigerator humming in the kitchen. He simply reached out, wrapped his strong hand around my trembling fingers, and asked a simple, devastating question that pierced straight through my carefully constructed defenses. He looked at my exhausted face, squeezed my hand, and asked why I was always broke. He demanded to know exactly where my paycheck was disappearing to every single month. I stared at David. My throat felt like sandpaper. I opened my cheap laptop, pulled up my banking history, and turned the screen toward him. I broke my vow of silence and laid out the math. $2,200 every single month, deposited directly into Patricia and Thomas Garcia's checking account. David did not laugh. He did not call me foolish or weak. His jaw clenched tight. He walked into my cramped kitchen, grabbed a yellow legal pad, and started restructuring my life. He drew a hard line down the center of the paper, separating my survival from their luxury. 2 weeks later, David got down on one knee right in the middle of that sweltering living room. There was no grand gesture. There were no hidden photographers. He held out a simple silver band and promised we would build a fence around our future. We were going to buy our own life. The following month, I made my first terrifying stand. We opened a private savings account at a local credit union. Instead of the usual amount, I deposited exactly $2,000 into my parents' fund. I held back $200 for our wedding budget. The retaliation was swift. Thomas called my cell phone 4 times that same afternoon. I let the calls bounce to voicemail. I sat on my thrift store couch and listened to my father's recorded voice. He did not sound like a loving parent checking on his daughter. He sounded like a furious landlord collecting rent. He demanded to know why the deposit was light, claiming a crucial landscaping bill was due, and I was jeopardizing his property value. My hands shook, but David sat beside me and held my shoulders. I deleted the message. For the first time in my adult life, I chose my own future. We had 90 days until our planned courthouse wedding. On a Thursday evening, David took a late shift at the rehabilitation clinic. I stood at my kitchen sink washing dishes. The soapy water felt warm on my hands. My cell phone rang on the counter. The caller ID displayed the Arizona Highway Patrol. I answered the call. A state trooper spoke in a flat, practiced tone. Interstate 17. A heavy pickup truck had crossed the median at 80 miles per hour. The driver was highly intoxicated. David never saw the headlights coming. I drove to the county morgue in my battered sedan. The building smelled of strong antiseptic and cold metal. I signed a yellow clipboard, officially identifying the man I loved. My entire future dissolved under a flickering fluorescent bulb. We held a modest graveside service on a scorching Tuesday morning. The desert sun beat down without mercy. Patricia and Thomas arrived 20 minutes late. My mother wore a black designer dress tailored for a cocktail party. She stood near the back of the small crowd, complaining about the fine dirt settling onto her expensive leather heels. My father checked his gold watch 3 times while the minister delivered the eulogy. They offered zero comfort. Patricia merely patted my shoulder without making eye contact, muttered a generic condolence about God's plan, and reminded Thomas they needed to beat the noon traffic for a brunch reservation. They walked away toward their pristine SUV before the groundskeeper even lowered the casket. 3 agonizing days passed. Grief does not pause the collection of rent, so I returned to my cubicle at the hospital. I sat staring at a glowing spreadsheet of insurance codes. Suddenly, the numbers began to float off the screen. The room tilted sharply. The hum of the air conditioner faded into a high-pitched ringing. I collapsed onto the carpeted hallway. I woke up on a stiff gurney in the emergency department. The air felt freezing. A physician stood over me holding a chart. He checked the monitors, shined a penlight into my eyes, and delivered a tidal wave of news. I was 10 weeks pregnant. My blood pressure had spiked to a stroke level. The physician looked at my pale face and issued a strict, non-negotiable order. Immediate bed rest. He warned me that returning to my double shifts would guarantee a miscarriage. I lay on that thin mattress and did the terrifying math. 1 income, a baby arriving in 7 months, 0 partner, 0 safety net. I took a taxi back to my empty apartment. I walked into the bathroom and sank onto the cold ceramic tiles. I pressed my hands against my stomach, trying to process the impossibility of my situation. My cell phone started vibrating on the sink counter. The screen displayed my mother's name. I answered the call, foolishly hoping for a shred of maternal instinct. I wanted my mother to tell me everything would be fine. Patricia did not ask about my health. She did not ask how I was coping with burying the man I planned to marry. Her voice sounded clipped, irritated, and urgent. She stated that the mortgage auto draft was scheduled for Friday morning. She then asked if all the recent funeral drama was going to cause a delay in my monthly transfer. I stared at the grout lines between the floor tiles. Something inside my chest snapped. The dutiful, terrified daughter died on that bathroom floor. I spoke in a quiet, steady voice. I informed her I was carrying David's child. I explained my severe medical condition and the doctor's strict bed rest mandate. Then I delivered the final, undeniable verdict. The money was gone. The deposits were stopping permanently. I needed every single penny I earned to keep her unborn grandchild alive. Patricia gasped. The sound traveling through the speaker was not shock or concern. It was pure, unfiltered rage. She accused me of weaponizing David's death to punish her. She called me an ungrateful, selfish child, trying to deliberately ruin her social standing. She shrieked that Thomas would face public humiliation at the country club because of my reckless choices. She demanded I figure out a way to work from my bed to cover their bills. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I pressed the red button on the screen and severed the connection. The silence in my apartment felt heavier than a concrete block. The following morning, I ignored the physician's rest order for exactly 1 hour. I drove my fractured sedan straight to the regional bank branch. I sat across from a teller and withdrew every remaining dollar from the account linked to my parents. I instructed the clerk to close the account permanently, leaving zero digital trace. I walked out of those heavy glass doors, holding a cashier's check. I was utterly alone in the world. I had no family to rely on. I had no fiancé waiting at home. I possessed nothing but a child growing inside me and a mounting pile of hospital bills. I locked my car doors and started the engine. I genuinely thought the worst part of my nightmare was over. I assumed my parents would simply scramble to find another victim to bleed dry. I had absolutely no idea they were already sitting in their luxurious living room, plotting a vicious narrative that would erase my existence from our hometown entirely. They were setting the stage for a betrayal so deep it would take 4 years and a wedding invitation to finally unearth it. I put my car in gear and drove north. Leaving the valley heat behind, I pointed my fractured sedan toward the mountains. 2 hours later, the towering pine trees of Flagstaff surrounded me. The elevation provided a crisp, cool breeze that felt like an entirely different planet. I used the funds from my cashier's check to secure a lease on a tiny, single-story house with peeling blue paint. The rent was cheap. The neighborhood was silent. I transferred my credentials to a local medical center and secured a new position auditing patient files. I worked quietly, keeping my head down and my personal life hidden. A senior coder named Diane sat in the cubicle next to mine. Diane was 55 years old. She possessed a sharp wit, a no-nonsense attitude, and eyes that missed nothing. She noticed my growing stomach. She noticed I ate lunch alone in my car. She noticed I never received phone calls from a husband or a mother. Diane did not ask prying questions. She simply started bringing extra portions of homemade lasagna to work and leaving them on my desk. When the labor pains started, on a freezing November morning, Diane did not hesitate. She drove me to the maternity ward in her station wagon. She stood beside my hospital bed and held my hand while I delivered my daughter. I named her Mia. I looked down at the tiny infant wrapped in a striped hospital blanket. I vowed right then to build a fortress around us. Nobody would ever use us again. While I was buying cheap formula and rocking a newborn to sleep in a secondhand crib, my parents were busy crafting a masterpiece of fiction back in Scottsdale. Patricia faced a terrifying social dilemma. She could not admit to her wealthy circle that her oldest daughter had cut off her secret financial allowance. Confessing the truth meant admitting they were broke. Instead, she spun a tragic fable. Patricia sat at her weekly country club luncheon sipping iced tea among the affluent wives. She dabbed her dry eyes with a linen napkin. She told the ladies that I had suffered a mental breakdown after David passed away. She lowered her voice and whispered that I started running with a dangerous crowd to cope with the grief. According to Patricia, I packed my bags in the middle of the night, abandoned my family, and vanished without a trace. To make the lie bulletproof, my parents orchestrated a strict communication blackout. Whenever extended relatives mailed me birthday cards or holiday greetings at my old Phoenix address, Patricia intercepted the envelopes. She took a thick red marker and wrote "Return to Sender" across the front. If a concerned aunt called asking if anyone had heard from me, Thomas would shake his head, stare at the floor, and tell them the local police had zero leads on my whereabouts. They murdered my reputation to bury their own financial incompetence. They turned me into a cautionary tale. I discovered their elaborate fiction 3 years later. I was sitting at my small kitchen table drinking black coffee and scrolling through social media on my phone. A post from my cousin Valerie appeared on my feed. Valerie posted a digital image of a burning candle. The caption read, "Praying for Adela's safe return. We miss you. I hope you find your way out of the darkness." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I clicked on Valerie's profile. I read dozens of comments from aunts, uncles, and family friends offering prayers for my mother's broken heart. They praised Patricia for her strength during such a dark chapter. They called me a lost soul. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have typed a fiery response. I could have uploaded a picture of my beautiful daughter in my quiet home. Exposing the truth on the internet felt incredibly tempting. But I stopped myself. Reaching out would only invite Patricia's chaos into my safe haven. They wanted me to be a ghost, so I decided to haunt them with my absence. I chose silence. My revenge would be my own success. I focused every ounce of my energy on my career and my child. I earned 3 rapid promotions at the medical center. I became the lead financial auditor for the entire regional hospital network. I spent my days uncovering hidden assets, exposing billing fraud, and balancing million-dollar ledgers. I knew exactly how to track money. I saved every bonus. I lived well beneath my means. I purchased the small blue house outright, painting the trim a bright, cheerful white and planting yellow flowers in the front yard. I opened a high-yield investment account. Month by month, year by year, I watched my balance climb. I reached a 6-figure milestone on my 30th birthday. I was secure, independent, and free. I had built the exact life my parents always pretended to have. But I built mine with honest labor instead of extortion. But peace built on a lie is just a ticking time bomb. The timeline snaps back to the present second. Brittany just fled my porch. I stand alone on the wooden steps, holding the expensive cream envelope my sister abandoned. The cool Arizona breeze rustles the pine needles above my roof. Mia is inside, waiting for me to finish painting her wooden birdhouse. The 4 years of quiet isolation have officially ended. I run my thumb under the gold foil seal. I pull out a heavy cardstock invitation. The elegant black font announces the upcoming marriage of Brittany Garcia to Vincent Sterling. The Sterling family name carries immense weight in our state. Vincent's father owns half the commercial real estate in Scottsdale. They are billionaires. They do not just have money, they have legacy and power. I read the date and location. The ceremony is scheduled for next month at an exclusive luxury resort in Sedona. The kind of venue that requires a $50,000 deposit just to reserve the dining hall. I stare at the cursive letters. My mind races through the implications. Brittany is marrying into the highest tier of local society. A wedding of this magnitude requires an astronomical budget. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for catering, floral arrangements, and venue rentals. The Sterlings will expect a flawless, opulent presentation from the bride's family. My parents are functionally broke. I know their numbers better than they do. I know they relied on my modest paycheck just to keep the lights on 5 years ago. There is zero chance they can afford to host a Sterling family event. They are drowning in a financial ocean, and Brittany just showed up at my door. I shake the envelope to see if anything else is inside. A secondary note slips out and flutters to the patio floor. I bend down to pick it up. The handwriting belongs to Patricia. It is a small, pale pink card. The ink is written in her signature loops. I read the words. The trap opens right beneath my feet, and the true motive for this sudden reunion stares me right in the face. The note does not contain an apology. It does not ask for forgiveness. It sets the stage for a financial ambush that will force me to choose between my hard-won peace and the ultimate destruction of their fake empire. I fold the pink card, put it in my pocket, and walk back inside to my daughter. The game has changed, and it is time for me to play. I placed the folded pink RSVP card onto the kitchen counter and focused entirely on my daughter. We finished painting the birdhouse, washed our hands in the sink, and ate a quiet dinner together. I read Mia a story about a bear learning to fish, tucked her under a warm quilt, and turned off the bedroom light. I walked back into the kitchen. The silence of the house usually brought me comfort. Tonight, the quiet felt heavy. I sat on a wooden stool and slid the wedding invitation toward me. I stared at the elegant black font displaying the groom's name. Vincent Sterling. The Sterling family essentially owned the commercial real estate market in the Phoenix metropolitan area. They developed luxury shopping centers and exclusive gated communities. They possessed generational wealth. They were the exact type of people my parents spent their entire lives trying to impress at the country club. My cell phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The screen lit up with an incoming text message from an unsaved number, but I recognized the area code immediately. I tapped the screen. The message belonged to Patricia. "We are so glad you are safe. Come to the wedding. Let us be a family again." I read those 3 sentences over and over. A bitter taste coated the back of my throat. The sheer audacity of the text message was staggering. Patricia ignored 4 years of total silence. She ignored the vicious lies she spread to our relatives, claiming I was a lost addict roaming the streets. More importantly, she ignored the clear evidence of a child living in my house. Brittany saw the pink tricycle in the hallway. Brittany saw the toys. Patricia knew she had a granddaughter. Yet the text contained 0 questions about Mia. There was no concern for my physical well-being. There was only a commanding invitation to step back into their web. I looked at the wedding venue listed on the cardstock. The Sedona Country Club. I knew exactly how much an event at that location cost. The facility demanded a steep premium just to walk through the front doors. A plated dinner for 200 guests, premium floral arrangements, and an open bar would push the total bill close to $80,000. My mind began to race. I audit financial records for a living. I know how money moves, how it hides, and how it runs out. 5 years ago, Patricia and Thomas relied on my meager hospital salary to prevent the bank from seizing their home. They possessed 0 savings. They possessed terrible spending habits. So how could they afford to host a lavish celebration for a billionaire family? The answer was simple. They could not. I stood up and grabbed my laptop from the home office. I set the computer on the kitchen island and opened a new browser tab. I did not need to hire a private investigator to uncover the truth. I spent 10 hours a day digging through financial discrepancies. I navigated directly to the Maricopa County Public Records Database. The portal provides open access to property deeds, court judgments, and tax histories. I typed my father's legal name into the search bar. I hit the enter key and waited for the server to process the request. My heart beat a steady rhythm against my ribs. As an auditor, I know the thrill of catching a discrepancy, but looking at my own family's ruin felt different. It felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. The reality of their situation unfolded before my eyes in stark, undeniable black and white text. My parents were not merely broke. They were drowning in a terrifying ocean of debt. I found 3 separate tax liens attached to the property. I traced the dates on the filings. They had failed to pay their county property taxes for 36 consecutive months. The penalties and interest fees alone were staggering. The government was preparing to auction the house on the courthouse steps to recover the unpaid balance. I scrolled further down the page, my eyes scanning the fine print of the legal notices. I discovered a mechanic's lien filed by a local roofing contractor. The claim demanded $12,000 for unpaid labor and materials. The deeper I dug, the worse the numbers looked. They had also pulled a secondary mortgage against the house. The documents revealed a predatory interest rate, the kind of loan only desperate people sign when traditional banks turn them away. They leveraged the very roof over their heads just to maintain their country club membership dues and lease Brittany's luxury vehicles. Their financial profile was a smoking crater. No legitimate banking institution would lend them a single dollar. Their credit scores were ruined. I closed the county portal and leaned back in my chair. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The picture they formed was chilling. Brittany did not drive up the mountain because she experienced a sudden wave of sisterly affection. She did not stand on my porch clutching that envelope because she wanted me to witness her special day. She drove up the mountain because the Sedona Country Club requires final payment 30 days before the event. The floral designers, the caterers, and the event coordinators were demanding their money. Patricia and Thomas had exhausted every line of credit they possessed. They could not pay for the wedding. If the wedding fell apart, the Sterlings would ask questions. The billionaire developers would run their own background checks. They would quickly discover the Scottsdale house was facing imminent foreclosure. Vincent might cancel the engagement out of sheer embarrassment to protect his family's corporate image. My parents viewed this marriage as a financial bailout. Marrying Brittany into the Sterling empire was their only exit strategy. Once she secured the billionaire husband, the parents would likely ask Vincent to pay off the tax liens. But they needed the wedding to happen first, and they needed cash immediately to prevent the vendors from walking away. They needed a ghost to return from the dead. I pulled up my own financial dashboard. I looked at the green numbers glowing on the screen. My credit score sat at 815. I had zero debt. I owned a house. I possessed a pristine six-figure savings account built on years of eating cheap meals and working overtime. Patricia and Thomas did not view me as a daughter. They viewed me as a walking, talking bank loan. The sickly sweet text message made perfect sense now. Let us be a family again, actually translated to, let us use your signature. They intended to corner me, play the role of the forgiving parents, and guilt me into co-signing a short-term personal loan. I estimated they needed at least $40,000 to cover the remaining vendor balances and save face in front of Vincent's wealthy parents. The conflict shifted abruptly. This was no longer a simple case of emotional manipulation or a mother missing her child. This was a calculated, brazen financial trap. They manufactured the story of my disappearance to protect their pride when I stopped paying their bills. Now they needed to resurrect me to protect their survival. I stared at the glowing laptop screen. The sheer mechanics of their plan disgusted me. Most people would block the phone number, throw the invitation into the trash, and lock the door. Most people would run from the incoming storm. I reached for my phone instead. I was tired of running. I was tired of being the silent victim in their grand theatrical production. If they wanted a family reunion, I would give them one. But they were going to pay the ultimate price for the admission ticket. I left the text message unread. I knew Patricia would not accept silence. She was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I shut the laptop, walked to the front window, and stared out into the dark Arizona night. I waited for the sun to rise and the phone to ring. I knew exactly what my mother would say tomorrow morning, and I knew exactly how I was going to use her own words to dismantle her life. The Arizona sun broke through my kitchen blinds at exactly 6 in the morning. I sat at the granite island, a warm ceramic mug in my hands, watching the dust motes dance in the early light. The house remained perfectly still. Mia was asleep down the hall. I did not turn on the television. I did not play any music. I simply waited. I knew the exact rhythm of desperation, and I knew my mother's internal clock. At 7:15, The cell phone vibrated against the hard countertop. The device buzzed steadily, inching toward the edge of the granite. I looked at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed Patricia Garcia. She did not waste time. She knew the vendor deadlines were suffocating her, and the facade was cracking. I slid my thumb across the glass and lifted the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I let the open line hum with dead space, forcing her to make the first move. Patricia spoke first. Her voice dripped with an artificial, sugary warmth that made my skin crawl. It was the exact tone she used when asking country club waitstaff for a complimentary bottle of wine. "Adela, honey," she cooed, "I am so relieved we finally found you. Your sister came home in tears yesterday. We have been worried sick." I remained mute. I stared at the stainless steel refrigerator, listening to the hollow performance. Patricia took a sharp breath, shifting her tactic. The sugary warmth dissolved into a grave, theatrical whisper. She was slipping into her favorite role, the long-suffering matriarch. "We know things got hard for you after David passed," Patricia continued. "We know you were not thinking clearly. But Brittany's wedding is a fresh start for all of us. Vincent's family is very traditional. They value unity. I have already smoothed everything over with the country club ladies." She paused, waiting for a thank you that would never arrive. When the silence stretched too long, she pushed forward, unveiling the script she wanted me to memorize. "Here is what we are going to do," Patricia instructed, her tone hardening into a command. "When you arrive at the venue, we will tell the Sterling family you suffered a severe medical crisis. We will say you were hospitalized for a long-term illness, and Thomas and I paid for your specialized care. We nursed you back to health in private to protect your dignity." The sheer mechanics of the lie stole the breath from my lungs. She wanted to convert my 4 years of peaceful, self-funded independence into a fictional sickness she personally cured. She intended to wear my absence like a badge of honor. "And regarding your situation," Patricia muttered. The disgust in her voice was palpable. "The child. We can tell Vincent's parents she belongs to a friend. Or we can say you adopted her to cope with your grief. No one needs to know about your out-of-wedlock mistake. We can protect you from that shame." My fingers tightened around the ceramic mug. The hot coffee inside rippled. She reduced my beautiful innocent daughter to a shameful secret that required a cover story. She called the child I carried through grief and labor a mistake. The urge to hurl the phone against the wall surged through my veins, but I forced my muscles to relax. Anger is loud, and loud people lose control. I needed cold, calculated silence. "Are you listening to me, Adela?" Patricia snapped, the sugary facade cracking under the pressure of my silence. "I am listening to every single word," I replied. My voice sounded flat, hollow, and devoid of any emotion she could feed on. Relieved by my verbal compliance, Patricia pivoted to the true purpose of the phone call. The hook descended into the water. "Good," she said, her breathing growing shallow. "Now, there is just one tiny administrative detail we need to clear up before the big day. You know how stressful wedding planning gets. The Sedona venue has a ridiculously strict corporate policy regarding event insurance." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the counter. Here it was, the pivot from emotional blackmail to financial extortion. "Thomas and I have our capital tied up in some very lucrative long-term real estate investments right now," Patricia lied flawlessly. "Our liquid assets are temporarily inaccessible. The floral designer and the catering director are demanding a secondary signature to finalize the contracts. It is just a standard formality, a temporary guarantee on paper. We just need you to put your name on the vendor agreements. You will not have to pay a single dime. Vincent's family will cover the honeymoon, and Thomas's investments will clear next month." She delivered the trap with the practiced ease of a seasoned grifter. A temporary guarantee. That phrase meant legally binding cosigner. If I signed those contracts the moment her credit cards declined, the Sedona Country Club would legally drain my savings account to cover the $80,000 wedding. She was asking me to hand over the fortress I built for Mia so she could eat prime rib with billionaires. I visualized the county tax liens I had discovered the night before. Her long-term real estate investments were actually imminent foreclosure notices. She was lying through her teeth, betting her entire social survival on my deeply ingrained childhood obedience. I processed the angles of the board. If I refused her demand right now and hung up the phone, Patricia would execute a backup plan. She would attend that lavish wedding and tell the Sterling family I was a dangerous, unstable lunatic who refused to support my own sister. She would play the weeping mother, abandoned by a cruel daughter. Vincent's billionaire parents would pity her. She would secure her place in their elite circle through manufactured martyrdom. If I stayed hidden in Flagstaff, she won. My absence gave her the blank canvas she needed to paint herself as the victim. To stop a lie of this magnitude, you cannot fight it from 2 hours away. You must walk directly into the room where the lie is being told, look the audience in the eye, and turn on the lights. Adela, Patricia demanded. I need an answer. The coordinator is calling me at noon. Will you sign the guarantee? I looked down the hallway toward Mia's closed door. I thought about the duct tape shoes I wore while paying my father's property taxes. I thought about David. I will be at the rehearsal dinner, I said. Oh, thank God. Patricia exhaled, her voice trembling with genuine relief. I knew you would see reason. I will email you the vendor contracts today. Just bring the signed copies to the dinner. It will be a beautiful family reunion. I will bring everything you deserve, I said. I moved my thumb and ended the call. The house fell silent again. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, surgical focus. I walked into my home office and booted up my desktop computer. The machine hummed to life. I reached under the desk and powered on the heavy-duty laser printer I used for auditing medical records. I opened my encrypted banking portal. I navigated to the closed accounts archive. I set the date range back 5 years. The screen populated with row after row of automated clearinghouse transfers. $2,200, month after month, year after year. A relentless river of my sweat and labor flowing directly into Thomas and Patricia's checking account. I clicked the print icon. The printer whirred, pulled a fresh sheet of white paper from the tray, and spat out the first page of evidence. Black ink stamped onto the page, creating an undeniable paper trail. I printed all 72 months of bank statements. I highlighted the routing numbers. I highlighted the destination account belonging to my parents. Next, I accessed the Maricopa County Treasury portal. I pulled the public records for their Scottsdale estate. I downloaded the default notices, the impending foreclosure warnings, and the mechanics liens. I clicked print again. The machine chugged steadily, building a thick stack of financial ruin on the output tray. I stood over the desk, organizing the warm pages into sequential order. The smell of fresh toner filled the small office. This was not a speech. This was not an emotional plea. This was hard math. I placed the documents inside a thick, reinforced manila folder and wrapped a red elastic band around the closure. I walked back to the kitchen and poured the lukewarm coffee down the stainless steel sink. I needed to plan the logistics. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the following Friday evening in the private dining room of the Sedona Country Club. The guest list would include the wedding party, the immediate relatives, and, most importantly, Vincent Sterling's parents. The very people Patricia was desperate to impress would be sitting at the same table, sipping champagne and discussing the future. My parents expected a broken, obedient girl to walk through those doors clutching signed vendor contracts. They expected me to lower my eyes, accept their fictional medical cover story, and silently fund their social salvation. They vastly underestimated the woman I had become. The medical billing specialist, who hunted down corporate fraud for a living, was not going to underwrite their delusions. I walked down the hall and gently pushed open Mia's bedroom door. She was curled under her quilt, her steady breathing filling the room. I stood in the doorway and watched her sleep. My mother had called her a mistake. My mother wanted to hide her existence to protect a country club reputation. I reached into my pocket and touched the pink RSVP card. The invitation was no longer a threat. It was a summons to a courtroom of my own making. I would drive down that mountain walk into that opulent dining room and dismantle their fraudulent empire brick by brick. The countdown to Friday began. I sat at my home office desk, staring at the printed stack of property tax liens and bank transfers. My auditor instincts hummed just beneath my skin. In my profession, you never enter a financial negotiation without checking every single blind spot. You verify the data twice before making an accusation. I opened a new tab on my web browser and navigated to a secure consumer credit monitoring portal. Running a comprehensive inquiry on my own Social Security number took less than 30 seconds. The dashboard loaded onto the screen. My overall numerical score remained pristine, reflecting years of careful saving and prompt payments. However, a glaring red flag blinked under the Active Trade Lines tab. An unfamiliar account sat near the bottom of the list. The origination date indicated the transaction occurred exactly 24 months prior. The principal amount listed, $15,000. The current status showed severe delinquency. Multiple missed payments were dragging the balance toward default. I leaned closer to the monitor. My pulse quickened. I had never requested a $15,000 cash advance in my entire life. I owned my vehicle outright. I held a fixed-rate mortgage. I paid cash for my weekly groceries. I clicked on the lender details to expand the history. The issuing institution was a regional credit union located down south in Maricopa County. Memory struck me like a physical blow. When I turned 18, my mother marched me into that specific credit union branch. She demanded we open a joint checking profile from my college textbooks. She insisted on remaining a primary custodian on the paperwork to monitor my spending habits. When I cut financial ties 5 years ago, I emptied my primary banking accounts and severed my main connections to Phoenix. I forgot about that dormant college account because it held a zero balance for nearly a decade. My parents remembered it. I navigated the credit portal and requested a digital copy of the original promissory note. The system processed my request and downloaded a secure PDF file. I opened the document and scanned the details. The mailing address listed on the borrower agreement did not show my Flagstaff residence. The paperwork displayed the Scottsdale property. I scrolled down to the signature line at the bottom of the page. Someone had scrawled my first and last name in black ink. The cursive loops were sharp, rigid, and angled too far to the right. I knew that handwriting intimately. My father always pressed his pen too hard against the paper when he signed checks. Thomas Garcia forged my signature. He used my pristine credit history to secure a desperate cash injection because his own credit score was ruined. They likely used that 15 grand to cover their country club membership dues or pay off a pending lawsuit. The delinquency on the fraudulent loan meant the credit union was actively preparing to turn the account over to a third-party collection agency. A collection agency would eventually file a civil lawsuit against me. They would seek a court judgment to garnish my hospital wages. My parents were willing to let my paycheck be seized to cover their luxury lifestyle. They were willing to destroy the financial fortress I built for my daughter just to keep up appearances. The realization washed over me like ice water. This was not merely a matter of them being bad with money. This was calculated predation. They committed felony identity theft. They crossed a legal boundary that carried severe state prison sentences. The dynamic of the impending confrontation shifted instantly. My parents were no longer just toxic manipulators playing mind games. They were desperate criminals, cornered by their own vanity. I did not panic. I felt a strange, cold sense of clarity wash over my mind. The sun climbed higher into the morning sky. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to a local bank branch in downtown Flagstaff. I walked through the glass doors and requested a meeting with the branch manager. A middle-aged man named Mr. Peterson led me into his glass-enclosed office. I sat in a leather chair and handed him my printed credit report, along with my state driver license. I explained the situation using precise financial terminology. I pointed out the fraudulent loan and the forged signature. Mr. Peterson scrutinized the Maricopa address on the promissory note. He cross-referenced it with the utility bills I brought to prove my Flagstaff residency. The discrepancy was undeniable. Mr. Peterson explained how identity theft within families is one of the most common, yet least reported financial crimes in the country. Victims usually fold under emotional pressure. They agree to absorb the debt to prevent their relatives from facing criminal prosecution. He looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and expectation, assuming I might change my mind and protect my father. I looked him dead in the eye and requested a blank fraud affidavit. I felt no urge to protect a man who would gladly feed me to the wolves to save his own skin. He pulled the paperwork from his desk drawer. He explained that claiming identity theft required a sworn statement under penalty of perjury. I took his pen and filled out the forms. I detailed the exact nature of the crime. I listed Thomas and Patricia Garcia as the primary suspects. Mr. Peterson called a notary public into the office. A woman holding a metal stamp watched me sign the official document. She pressed her heavy stamp onto the bottom of the page, making the accusation legally binding. Mr. Peterson handed me a certified copy of the affidavit. He strongly advised me to drive directly to the local police precinct and file criminal charges immediately. He warned me that delaying the police report could complicate the investigation. I thanked him for his time. I folded the heavy parchment and slid it into my purse. I had zero intention of involving law enforcement today. Arresting my father in a quiet police station felt entirely too private. The Sterling family needed to witness the true nature of the people they were inviting into their billionaire empire. I wanted a public execution. I drove back to my house and walked into the home office. I retrieved the reinforced manila folder. I placed the certified fraud affidavit right on top of the property tax liens and the 72 months of bank transfers. The weapon was fully assembled. The stakes were no longer about securing an apology or establishing boundaries. This Friday was about legal survival. The next 48 hours dragged by at a grueling pace. I spent Thursday cleaning my house and preparing meals for Mia. Friday morning finally arrived. The air outside felt crisp and cool. I packed a small overnight bag. I packed a separate canvas tote for my daughter. I opened my closet and selected a simple, tailored navy blue dress. It was professional, understated, and commanded respect. I was not dressing for a party. I was dressing for a deposition. At 3 in the afternoon, I drove Mia across town to a quiet suburban neighborhood. I parked in front of a modest brick house. Diane stood on the front porch waiting for us. Diane was the senior medical coder who drove me to the hospital when I went into labor. She was the closest thing to a real mother I possessed. I carried the canvas tote up the steps. Diane smiled and scooped Mia into her arms. The little girl giggled and pointed at a friendly golden retriever resting on the living room rug. Diane did not ask me for specific details about my weekend plans. She noticed my stiff posture. She saw the manila folder resting on the passenger seat of my car. She knew I was driving south to face the ghosts I ran away from 4 years ago. Diane placed a hand on my shoulder. She squeezed my jacket. She told me to drive safe and promised Mia would be spoiled with ice cream and cartoons until I returned. I knelt down and kissed my daughter on her forehead. She smelled like baby shampoo and graham crackers. I promised her I would be back by Sunday. Walking away from her felt like tearing a muscle, but I knew securing our future required this temporary separation. I got back into my sedan and locked the doors. I turned the ignition. The engine hummed. I merged onto the interstate and pointed my vehicle south. The drive from Flagstaff to Sedona takes less than an hour, but the geography changes drastically. The winding road down Oak Creek Canyon required intense focus. Sharp switchbacks and steep drop-offs mirrored the emotional terrain I was navigating. The towering green pine trees gradually yielded to sweeping canyons. The elevation dropped, the temperature rose. The scenery transformed into giant formations of red sandstone glowing under the late afternoon sun. I kept my eyes fixed on the asphalt. The opulent wealth of Sedona began to reveal itself. High-end sports cars and luxury SUVs dominated the traffic lanes. These were the people Vincent Sterling belonged to. These were the people my mother worshipped. My cell phone remained silent on the passenger seat next to the manila folder. Patricia assumed I was currently panicking in my car, terrified of facing the wealthy in-laws rehearsing the fictional medical story she ordered me to tell. She assumed she held all the leverage. She had no idea she invited an auditor to a crime scene. The red sandstone cliffs of Sedona loomed ahead, casting long shadows across the highway. My sedan tires hugged the curves of State Route 89A. The passenger seat held only my purse and the reinforced manila folder. My cell phone rested on top of the leather console. Suddenly, the screen illuminated. A ringtone broke the quiet hum of the engine. The caller identification displayed a 10-digit number I did not recognize, originating from a Phoenix area code. I kept my eyes on the winding road. Answering unknown callers usually resulted in telemarketer pitches. However, the timing felt too precise. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours. I reached over, tapped the green icon, and placed the device on speaker mode. "Hello," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You always were the only person in this family who actually showed up on time," a voice replied. The sound was sharp, dry, and coated with the distinct rasp of someone who smoked menthol cigarettes for 3 decades before quitting cold turkey. I recognized the cadence instantly. It belonged to Helen Garcia, my father's mother. My grandmother was 78 years old. Helen was a terrifying force of nature. While Thomas and Patricia spent their adult lives pretending to possess generational wealth, Helen actually held it. She built a commercial hardware supply company from the ground up alongside my grandfather. She wore tailored pantsuits, drove a sensible sedan, and despised the artificial country club culture Patricia worshipped. Helen treated social climbers with a level of disdain that could freeze water. We had not spoken since David died. "Grandma Helen," I answered, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "How did you get this number?" "I pay a private investigator a very reasonable retainer to locate things I need to find," Helen stated flatly. "And right now, I needed to find you before you walked into the lion den." I checked my rearview mirror, navigating a steep descent. "Are you calling to convince me to stay home?" Helen let out a harsh, barking laugh. The sound crackled through the phone speaker. "I am calling to make sure you packed enough ammunition, Adela. I spent the last 4 years watching my son and his foolish wife build a house of cards. I want front row seats when the wind blows it down." I merged into the slower traffic lane, letting a luxury sports car pass me. The validation in her voice hit me like a physical shockwave. She did not sound angry. She sounded expectant. "You know about the lie?" I asked, keeping my voice steady.
"I know your mother is a pathological liar who would sell her own shadow for a country club membership,"
Helen replied. "I was at the boutique yesterday afternoon. Brittany had her final dress fitting. She spent the entire hour hyperventilating in the dressing room. She thought the seamstress was out of earshot. She called Patricia in a panic, shrieking about how you were alive and living in a blue house.
Helen paused, taking a slow breath.
Brittany sounded like she had seen a ghost, which makes sense considering Patricia spent the last 48 months telling everyone you wandered off into the desert and lost your mind. Did you believe her? I asked. Not for a single second, Helen declared. People like you do not just wander off. You balance ledgers, you plan, you survive. The highway straightened out, leading toward the resort district. The sun began dipping behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. 3 years ago, I stopped by your parents' house unannounced, Helen continued, her tone dropping into a serious register. Patricia was standing in the kitchen. She had a piece of mail in her hand. She looked terrified when I walked through the door. She shoved the envelope into the paper shredder before I could see the contents. But she missed the corner. I saw the postmark. Flagstaff, Arizona. The return address had your first initial. My chest tightened. That must have been the single holiday card I sent, a momentary lapse in my own boundary, hoping for a shred of decency. Patricia destroyed it. I watched the machine chew up that letter, Helen said. I knew right then she was hiding you. I knew she cut you off from the rest of us. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. The question tasted bitter. You let them tell the whole family I was gone. If I confronted Patricia in that kitchen, she would have denied everything and played the victim, Helen explained smoothly. She would have spun a new lie. You cannot cure a disease by treating the symptoms, Adela. You have to wait for the rot to expose itself. I kept my mouth shut. I decided to sit back and watch exactly how deep they would dig their own graves. I knew they would eventually run out of money. I knew they would try to use you again. I just needed to be patient. A billboard for the Sedona Country Club flashed past my passenger window. I was less than 10 miles away. They are desperate, Grandma. They are broke. They are worse than broke, Helen corrected. They are cornered, and a cornered animal bites. Listen to me very carefully. I know exactly what Patricia has planned for you tonight. I lowered the air conditioning fan to hear her better. She wants me to sign a temporary guarantee for the vendors. She wants you to foot the entire bill, Helen snapped. I saw the catering director threatening Thomas in the lobby of the resort this morning. The final balance is $25,000. The venue is threatening to lock the doors tomorrow morning if that balance is not cleared tonight. I let out a slow breath. The math aligned perfectly with my expectations. Here is her strategy, Helen warned, her voice turning sharp and tactical. Patricia is going to wait until the rehearsal dinner is in full swing. She is going to wait until Vincent's parents are sitting right across the table. The Sterlings are billionaires. They despise public scandals. Patricia knows you hate making a scene. She plans to corner you in front of the groom's family. She will hand you the credit card authorization form and a pen. She expects you to sign it, just to avoid embarrassing yourself in front of the wealthy in-laws. I stared at the road ahead. The sheer calculation of the ambush was breathtaking. Patricia intended to weaponize my own sense of decorum. She thought she could trap me in a cage of social etiquette. She assumes I will fold under the pressure of an audience, I said. She assumes you are still the terrified 27-year-old girl who paid their mortgage, Helen replied. She thinks you are soft. I reached over and touched the thick manila folder resting on the seat. The certified fraud affidavit lay heavy inside the cardboard sleeve. I am not soft anymore, I said. Prove it, Helen commanded. When you walk into that dining room tonight, do not let her pull you into a quiet hallway. Do not let her whisper in your ear. You make her play her hand on the main stage. Let the Sterling family see exactly who they are marrying into. The resort entrance appeared on my right. Tall stone pillars marked the gateway to the exclusive property. Valet attendants in crisp white uniforms stood near a circular driveway. I will be sitting at the head table, next to Vincent's mother, Helen said. I am wearing a silver jacket. When Patricia makes her move, you look at me. And Adela, yes. Do not hold back. Burn it down to the foundation. The line went dead. The dial tone echoed through the car interior. I pressed the button to end the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I turned the steering wheel and pulled into the resort entrance. The tires crunched over the pristine gravel driveway. I handed my keys to a young valet driver. I stepped out of the vehicle and smoothed the front of my navy blue dress. I grabbed my purse and tucked the reinforced manila folder firmly under my arm. The evening air felt warm against my skin. The sounds of a string quartet drifted from the main terrace. Laughter echoed from the outdoor cocktail lounge. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked expensive. I walked through the heavy wooden double doors of the main lobby. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling. The floors were polished marble. I checked the digital directory near the concierge desk. The Garcia and Sterling rehearsal dinner was located in the Red Rock private dining room on the second floor. My grandmother gave me the final piece of armor I needed. I no longer felt like a rogue element crashing a party. I had an ally sitting at the head table. I had the financial records. I had the legal documents. I stepped onto the grand staircase. My low heels clicked against the stone steps. Every single step pushed the terrified, obedient daughter further into the past. I reached the second-floor landing. A pair of ornate oak doors stood closed at the end of the hallway. A small silver placard displayed my sister's name. I placed my hand on the brass door handle. The muffled sound of clinking glass and polite conversation leaked through the wood. The trap was waiting on the other side. I turned the handle, pushed the heavy door open, and walked inside. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped into the Red Rock private dining room. The space hummed with the steady sound of clinking crystal glasses and soft jazz music played by a live string quartet. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of the darkening desert canyons. Waiters in crisp black vests circulated among the guests carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and expensive appetizers. I stood near the entrance, holding my small clutch purse and the reinforced manila folder. I wore my tailored navy dress. I did not look like a lost soul. I did not look like a broken woman seeking charity. I looked like a seasoned auditor walking into a hostile corporate takeover. It took less than 10 seconds for the first relative to notice my presence. Aunt Brenda, my mother's older sister, stood near the carving station, holding a small porcelain plate. The silver serving tongs slipped from her fingers and clattered loudly against the metal chafing dish. Her jaw dropped open. She nudged her husband, Uncle Richard, spilling a few drops of red wine onto his cuff. Within moments, a rapid ripple effect swept across the entire dining room. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. I felt the heavy weight of 50 pairs of eyes locking onto my face. These were the aunts, uncles, and cousins who spent the last 4 years praying for my fractured mind. They believed the elaborate fiction my parents spun at country club luncheons. They expected to see a haggard, unstable addict wandering in from the streets. Instead, they saw a professional woman standing tall, radiating quiet authority. The whispers began instantly. The sound reminded me of a sudden gust of wind rushing through dry autumn leaves. I kept my posture rigid and scanned the room. I found the head table located near the center of the room. Grandma Helen sat dead center, wearing a sharp silver blazer, just as she promised during our phone call. She held a glass of sparkling water. When our eyes met, she did not smile. She offered a single, distinct nod of approval. She was watching the chessboard, waiting for the pieces to move. A blur of lavender silk darted across the polished dining room floor. My mother, Patricia, spotted me. She moved with frantic speed, her high heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. Her face was stretched into a terrifying artificial grin, designed entirely for the wealthy onlookers observing our interaction. She reached me before any of the stunned relatives could step forward to ask questions. Patricia did not offer a hug. She did not ask how my drive went. She did not ask about her granddaughter sleeping back in Flagstaff. Her manicured fingers clamped onto my upper arm like a steel vise. Her fingernails dug into my bare skin through the fabric of my dress sleeve. She leaned in close, maintaining that plastic camera-ready smile for the crowd, while her eyes burned with pure, unadulterated panic. She leaned toward my ear. Her breath smelled of expensive gin and raw fear. "You are late," Patricia hissed. Her voice was a toxic, hurried whisper meant only for me. "The venue coordinator is standing in the lobby right now. She is threatening to cancel the entire reception tomorrow morning if the final balance is not cleared immediately. Give me the signed guarantee right now so I can go fix this." She pulled heavily on my arm, attempting to drag me backward toward the exit doors. She wanted to pull me into the secluded, empty hallway. She needed to bully me in private, where the billionaires could not hear the desperation in her voice. She wanted to isolate the threat and force my signature in the shadows. I did not take a single step backward. I planted my heels firmly onto the hardwood floor. I stiffened my arm, locking my elbow, forcing her to halt her physical momentum. Patricia yanked a second time, pulling harder, but I remained rooted to the spot. Her artificial smile flickered. She looked at me, genuine confusion replacing the panic in her eyes. The obedient, terrified daughter she remembered would have scurried into the hallway the moment she applied pressure. That daughter died 5 years ago, on a bathroom floor. "Let go of my arm, Mom," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough for the nearby tables to hear clearly. Patricia flinched. She quickly released her grip, dropping her hand and smoothing the wrinkles she'd just created on my navy sleeve. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, checking to see who witnessed the minor altercation. Her chest heaved as she tried to regulate her breathing. "Adela, please," Patricia muttered through gritted teeth, dropping the fake smile for a fraction of a second. "Do not do this here. We need to go into the hall. We need to handle the paperwork before everything falls apart." "We are not going into the hall," I replied, keeping my posture rigid and my tone icy. "If we are doing this, we are doing it right here, in the open." The sudden shift in my mother's demeanor caught the attention of the most important people in the room. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair approached our tense circle. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that likely cost more than my first car. A woman dripping in authentic diamond jewelry walked beside him. These were the Sterlings, Vincent's parents. The billionaire developers my parents were trying to deceive with this extravagant charade. Arthur Sterling possessed the sharp, analytical gaze of a man who built a corporate empire from scratch. He noticed the rigid tension radiating between my mother and me. He stepped forward, offering a polite but commanding presence that demanded an explanation. "Patricia," Arthur said, his deep voice carrying a note of polite concern. "Is everything all right over here? My wife and I noticed a bit of a commotion near the entrance." My mother performed a miraculous, sickening pivot. The panic vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by the tragic martyr persona she perfected over the last 4 years. She let out a long, theatrical sigh and placed a trembling hand over her heart. She looked at the Sterlings with a manufactured expression of profound sorrow and desperate hope. She was a master of the stage, and she was playing her best role. "Oh, Arthur," Patricia crooned, using his first name to feign an unearned intimacy. "Everything is wonderful. It is just a very overwhelming moment for our family. I would love to introduce you to my eldest daughter." She gestured toward me, her hand shaking slightly to sell the performance to the wealthy couple. "This is Adela. Patricia continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy and heroic suffering. She is the troubled child we told you about, the one who has been battling so many severe health issues these past few years. We have kept her out of the public eye to protect her privacy, while Thomas and I funded her recovery. Mrs. Sterling placed a hand on her pearl necklace, her eyes softening with genuine pity. She looked at me like I was a fragile rescue animal brought in from the cold. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, it almost felt real. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Sterling murmured, offering a soft, condescending smile. "We had no idea you were well enough to travel. We are so glad you could make it to your sister's special day. Your parents have been so worried about you." Patricia did not let me answer the woman. She stepped closer to Arthur Sterling, beaming with toxic pride. She decided to double down on the extortion right in front of the groom's parents. She threw the final hook, trying to box me into a corner where refusing her demand would make me look insane to the billionaires. She weaponized their presence to force my hand. "Adela has made such miraculous progress," Patricia announced to the billionaire couple, projecting her voice so the nearby relatives could hear the redemption arc. "In fact, she drove all the way down here tonight to present Brittany and Vincent with a very generous wedding gift. She insisted on personally handling the final vendor contracts as a thank you for all the financial support Thomas and I provided during her dark times." The sheer audacity hung in the air like thick smoke. My mother was attempting to steal my savings while simultaneously taking credit for my fictional recovery in front of the very people she was trying to swindle. She stared at me, her eyes screaming a silent, desperate command. "Hand over the folder. Sign the paper. Play the part. Save our lives." I looked at Arthur Sterling. I looked at his diamond-clad wife. I glanced across the room and saw Brittany standing near the bar, her face pale, watching the interaction with wide, terrified eyes. Then I looked at my mother. The dining room around us had grown eerily quiet. The string quartet finished their song, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of 50 relatives holding their breath. I felt the heavy cardboard edge of the manila folder resting against my hip. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply adjusted my grip on the documents containing her financial ruin. I looked directly into Arthur Sterling's sharp, analytical eyes, and I smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile. The kind of smile an auditor gives right before they reveal a fatal ledger error. The tension in the room thickened until it felt heavy enough to suffocate everyone standing near us. The trap was sprung, but I was not the one caught inside it. Arthur Sterling stood frozen, awaiting my response. Before the billionaire developer could ask another question, a new figure shattered the tense circle. A woman in a sharp charcoal pantsuit marched across the polished hardwood floor. She carried a thick silver clipboard pressed firmly against her chest. A plastic name tag pinned to her lapel identified her as the senior event director for the resort. She bypassed the wealthy groom's parents entirely. Her jaw was set in a rigid, unforgiving line. She locked her target on my mother and father. The director cleared her throat. The sound sliced through the lingering notes of the live jazz music. The string quartet lowered their bows, and the rich hum of the cello fading into an uncomfortable quiet. The musicians sensed the immediate shift in the room's atmosphere and placed their instruments on their stands. The director addressed Patricia and Thomas. Her tone lacked any hospitality. It was the distinct clinical voice of a debt collector arriving to seize assets. She announced that the credit card placed on file for the catering and floral balance had declined. She specified that this was the 4th consecutive attempt to authorize the charge. She named the exact figure out loud so the surrounding guests could hear the magnitude of the problem. $25,000. She tapped a manicured fingernail against her clipboard. She checked her silver wristwatch and delivered a hard, non-negotiable deadline. 10 minutes. If a valid payment method did not process in 10 minutes, she would instruct the kitchen staff to turn off the ovens. She would order the waitstaff to pack up the roasted tenderloin and clear the tables. The reception scheduled for tomorrow afternoon would be officially canceled. A suffocating silence blanketed the private dining room. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. You could hear the ice settling inside the water pitchers on the nearby tables. The scent of expensive perfumes and catered appetizers suddenly felt heavy and stale. Arthur Sterling narrowed his eyes. His gaze shifted slowly from the event director to my mother. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, his posture changing from a polite guest to a suspicious executive. The carefully constructed facade of the affluent, generous Garcia family began cracking right down the middle. My father stepped out from the shadows near the private bar. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson. Sweat beaded along his hairline, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. He tugged at the tight collar of his rented tuxedo. He looked like a man standing on the trap door of a gallows, waiting for the lever to pull. Thomas attempted to salvage his manufactured dignity. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. He told the event director there had been a simple misunderstanding regarding the routing numbers. He claimed I was the primary financial guarantor for the wedding weekend. He commanded the woman to run my card for the full amount. He tried to inject authority into his voice, but the underlying terror betrayed his every syllable. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. He was silently begging me to play along, to open my purse and to save his reputation in front of the billionaires he worshipped. The groom stepped into our tense circle. Vince wore a custom-tailored suit and a look of profound confusion. He glanced at the event director, then at my sweating father. Vince asked what was happening. He reminded Thomas that the Garcia family promised to handle the catering expenses, while the Sterlings secured the venue rental and the open bar. Vince was a man who dealt in signed contracts and corporate trust. He did not understand why a declined card was causing a public scene at a rehearsal dinner. He looked at me, trying to place my identity within the chaotic puzzle. He had never met the sister who supposedly vanished into the desert. Before I could introduce myself to the man my sister intended to marry, Brittany broke through the crowd. She wore a white silk rehearsal gown that swept across the floor. Her perfect makeup was streaked with fresh tears, ruining her carefully curated appearance. The reality of losing her extravagant country club wedding crushed her sense of entitlement. She grabbed my forearm. Her grip was frantic, her fingernails digging into my skin. She begged me not to ruin her special day. She pleaded with me to just hand over the plastic and fix the problem. She used the word sister as a weapon, attempting to invoke a familial bond that died half a decade ago. She cried about how much she deserved this flawless weekend. She blamed me for the stress, acting as though my refusal to instantly fund her dream was a personal attack on her happiness. I looked down at Brittany's shaking hands clutching my sleeve. I felt a fleeting wave of pity, not for her lost party, but for the delusion she lived inside. She truly believed other people existed solely to underwrite her lifestyle. I gently but firmly detached her fingers from my arm. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary between my reality and their theater. Patricia sensed the impending collapse of her entire world. She closed the distance between us in 2 quick strides. She leaned in so close I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. She dropped the sweet, concerned mother routine she had performed for Mrs. Sterling just moments ago. Her features twisted into a mask of pure venom. She whispered a threat directly into my ear. She told me that if I did not pay the balance right now, I would never see this family again. She promised to exile me forever. She swore to make sure no relative ever spoke my name. She gritted her teeth, her voice dripping with malice, demanding I pull out my wallet and do my duty as a daughter. I processed her threat. Exile, isolation, banishment. She offered these concepts as severe punishments. She did not realize she was threatening me with the exact peace I spent the last 4 years cultivating in Flagstaff. She thought cutting me off was a penalty. She failed to understand that I already built a fortress she could not enter. Her threat held zero leverage. It was a hollow, useless weapon wielded by a woman who had nothing left to bargain with. I turned my head away from Patricia. I looked directly at the event director, holding the silver clipboard. I made sure my posture remained perfectly straight. I projected my voice so every single person in the dining room could hear my next words. The acoustics of the Sedona Country Club carried my declaration to the furthest corners of the room. I have no financial ties to these people, I said. I did not raise my voice, but the words cut through the silence like a scalpel. I am not paying for this wedding, I announced. The declaration hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. It was the first strike of the hammer against their glass castle. Arthur Sterling's jaw tightened. His wife let out a small, shocked gasp, stepping back from my mother as if Patricia carried a contagious disease. The extended relatives who whispered about my fictional drug addiction stared in stunned disbelief. They watched the wealthy, generous parents they admired turn into exposed frauds. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror as the reality of my refusal settled over the room. My father stared at the hardwood floor, unable to meet the gaze of the billionaire developer he tried to swindle. I held the heavy manila folder against my side. The event director tapped her pen against her clipboard. She informed Thomas that he now had 9 minutes left to produce $25,000. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the lobby, the sound of her footsteps echoing loudly, leaving my parents stranded in the center of the room. The safety net was officially gone. The rhythmic click of the director's heels faded down the corridor. Arthur Sterling stepped forward, breaking the frozen perimeter around my parents. He bypassed my mother entirely and planted himself directly in front of my father. Arthur was a self-made billionaire who survived brutal corporate boardrooms. He smelled blood in the water. "Thomas," Arthur said. His voice was low and dangerous. "Explain this to me right now. We signed a mutual agreement last October. My firm covered the resort rental fees and the open bar. You looked me in the eye and promised you had the catering and floral deposits handled in cash." My father shrank under the executive's glare. He wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip, using the back of his trembling hand. He opened his mouth, searching for a lifeline. He blamed a banking error. He claimed his accountant froze a major asset account to prevent a tax penalty. He spun a frantic web of financial jargon, hoping Arthur would accept the excuse as standard business friction. Arthur did not blink. He recognized a cornered liar. I slid my thumb under the red elastic band wrapping my reinforced manila folder. I snapped the string back. The sharp snap echoed like a gunshot in the silent dining room. Everyone turned their attention back to me. I folded the cardboard flap open. "Mr. Sterling?" I said, catching the older man's attention. "My father is not waiting for an asset account to clear. He does not have an accountant. He is functionally bankrupt." Thomas lunged forward, raising his hands. "Do not listen to her, Arthur. She is unstable. I told you she was sick." I ignored my father. I pulled the first stack of printed records from the folder. The paper felt heavy and warm in my hands. I held out the stack toward Arthur. The billionaire hesitated for a fraction of a second, evaluating my steady posture before reaching out and taking the documents. "You build commercial real estate," I told Arthur. "You understand hard numbers. Look at the highlighted columns." Arthur adjusted his reading glasses. He flipped open the first page. "For 72 consecutive months, I paid their residential mortgage," I stated clearly, projecting my voice over the quiet murmurs of the extended family. "I worked double shifts at a hospital to keep a roof over their heads. Those are official clearinghouse transfer receipts. You will see my checking account routing number at the top. You will see the destination routing number belongs to Thomas and Patricia Garcia. The total sum is $132,000. Arthur scanned the rows of black ink. His eyes darted across the official bank logos, the dates, the matching transaction IDs. He flipped to the second page, then the third. The undeniable math verified every single word I spoke. The ledger was bulletproof.
This is a fabrication!
Patricia shrieked, her voice cracked, rising an octave into a panicked screech. She abandoned her elegant posture and threw herself toward Arthur. She extended her manicured claws, attempting to snatch the paper trail right out of the billionaire's hands. Arthur reacted with lightning speed. He sidestepped her desperate lunge. He raised the stack of papers high above his head, keeping the evidence out of her reach. He looked down at my mother with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. He was a man who respected ledgers, and he held proof of her extortion.
Do not touch me, Patricia,
Arthur warned, his tone turning to ice. Patricia stumbled backward, her chest heaving. She whipped her head around, searching for an ally in the crowd. The aunts and uncles who previously offered her sympathy now stared at her with open suspicion. The martyrdom she enjoyed for half a decade was burning to the ground. I glanced toward the head table. Grandma Helen sat perfectly still. She raised her glass of sparkling water in my direction, offering a silent, grim toast to the carnage. She was watching the house of cards collapse just as she predicted. I turned my attention to the groom. Vince stood a few feet away, his mouth slightly open, watching his future in-laws self-destruct. I pulled the second stack of papers from my folder. I handed them directly to Vince. I stopped transferring that money 5 years ago, I explained to the young man. My fiancé was killed by a drunk driver. 3 days after I buried him, I discovered I was pregnant, with a high-risk pregnancy. My doctor ordered strict bed rest. I called my mother to tell her I needed my own paycheck to survive. Vince stared at the documents in his hands. They were copies of the final bank withdrawal closing the joint channel forever, stapled directly to David's funeral program. The dates aligned flawlessly. When I refused to pay their bills, they cut me off, I said, locking eyes with Vince. They told our relatives I suffered a mental breakdown. They told the country club I wandered off and disappeared. They erased me to hide their own financial ruin. Vince looked at Brittany. His bride stood frozen near the bar, her face ashen, clutching her silk gown. Vince waited for her to deny the accusation. He waited for her to defend her parents. Brittany simply stared at the floor, tears ruining her expensive makeup, unable to produce a single lie to counter the paper evidence. She knew the truth. She was wearing a dress bought with stolen time and unpaid labor.
you are a monster.
Patricia spat at me, tears of genuine defeat streaming down her cheeks. You came here to destroy us. I came here to deliver the signature you requested, I replied. I reached into the folder one last time. I retrieved the final document. The heavy parchment paper featured a raised notary seal stamped at the bottom. I bypassed the Sterling family. I walked directly up to my father. Thomas looked like a deflated balloon. His shoulders sagged. His rented tuxedo suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. I shoved the document against his chest. He reflexively brought his hands up to catch it. 2 years ago, your money finally ran out. I told him, keeping my voice low, forcing him to listen to his own crime. You needed cash to keep up your country club charade. You found an old dormant college checking account with my name still attached to it. Thomas looked down at the paper. His eyes widened as he recognized the regional credit union logo. His knees buckled slightly, as if an invisible weight dropped onto his spine. That is a certified, notarized fraud affidavit, I announced to the room. You forged my signature on a $15,000 personal loan. You stole my identity. The account is in severe default, and the collection notices were mailed to your Scottsdale address." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Aunt Brenda covered her mouth with both hands. Uncle Richard took a step away from the buffet table, creating physical distance between himself and his brother. Stealing from a daughter to fund a luxury lifestyle was shameful. Forging a signature to commit bank fraud was a felony. The whispered rumors about my mental health vanished, replaced instantly by the glaring reality of their criminal behavior. Arthur Sterling lowered the stack of bank transfers. He folded the papers neatly and handed them back to me. The billionaire executive surveyed the wreckage of the Garcia family. He looked at the forged loan document trembling in my father's hands. He looked at the weeping bride who enabled the deception. The illusion evaporated. The designer dresses, the rented tuxedos, and the Grand Sedona venue could no longer hide the rotting foundation beneath them. The wealthy facade Patricia spent her entire adult life curating was reduced to dust in less than 5 minutes. My mother let out a jagged, wretched sob. She sank onto a padded dining chair, burying her face in her hands. There was no theatrical grace left in her movements. She was a cornered grifter, caught under a bright spotlight, stripped of her audience and her power. I stood in the center of the silent room. I did not feel any anger. I did not feel sorrow. I felt a clean, sweeping sense of justice. The heavy burden I carried for years dissolved into the cool evening air. I had brought the truth, and the truth had set me free. The sound of Patricia weeping provided the only noise in the dining room. Thomas remained frozen, staring at the notarized fraud document trembling in his palms. The paper represented a loaded gun, and he was staring down the barrel. I watched his chest rise and fall in shallow, panicked breaths. He had nothing left to say. I shifted my attention to Brittany. My younger sister stood near the mahogany bar, clutching the folds of her white silk rehearsal gown. Her perfect makeup ran in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked at the billionaire groom, then at our ruined parents, and finally locked her tear-streaked eyes on me. I expected her to turn on Thomas. I expected her to demand an explanation for the stolen identity and the secret bankruptcy. I assumed learning her parents were felons would shatter her worldview. I drastically underestimated the depth of her entitlement. The shock vanished from Brittany's face. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure, venomous rage. She did not care about the forgery. She did not care about the years of financial extortion I endured. She only cared that the caterer was turning off the ovens and her lavish party was dying. Brittany marched across the polished hardwood floor. She closed the distance between us, her high heels clicking aggressively. She stopped inches from my face. Her breathing was ragged.
"You have a house!"
Brittany screamed. Her voice cracked, echoing off the high ceiling. The string quartet players flinched. "You have savings," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "You have a 6-figure bank account. You could have just paid it. You could have signed the paper and fixed this for me. We are your family." The sheer, twisted logic of her argument hung in the air. She believed my financial stability, built on years of eating cheap noodles and driving a broken car, belonged to her. She viewed my money as a communal resource designed to fund her luxury. I looked at her without blinking. "I owe you nothing." The calm detachment in my voice pushed Brittany over the edge. She lost her grip on whatever shred of sanity she had left. She decided to go for the throat. "You are just bitter," Brittany yelled, her face contorting with malice. "You are just jealous because David died and you are a miserable single mother. You want to ruin my wedding because no one will ever want to marry you now." The cruelty of the statement hit the room like a physical shockwave. Aunt Brenda let out a loud, audible gasp. Uncle Richard took a step backward, shaking his head in disgust. The extended relatives, who had spent years pitying Patricia, now stared at Brittany with open revulsion. Using a dead fiancé and an innocent child as ammunition in a financial dispute crossed a line that no amount of country club etiquette could repair. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand. I felt the familiar cold armor slide into place around my heart. Her words were meant to draw blood, but they only confirmed exactly why I walked away 5 years ago. My daughter is safe, I said quietly. And David would be disgusted by every single one of you. Brittany let out a frustrated, guttural scream. Her desperation overrode her basic human decency. She lunged forward. She reached out with both hands, her manicured claws grabbing for the small leather clutch tucked under my arm. She was actively trying to mug me in the middle of a private country club. She wanted to dig through my purse, find a credit card, and run it down to the event director herself. She grabbed the strap of my bag. I planted my feet and jerked my shoulder back, ripping the leather from her grasp. She stumbled forward, her silk gown twisting around her ankles. She caught her balance and raised her hands to lunge a second time. She never made it. A strong hand clamped down on Brittany's upper arm. Vince stepped into the fray. He grabbed his bride by both shoulders and physically hauled her backward. He pulled her away from me with enough force to spin her around. Brittany stumbled against Vince's chest. She looked up at him, her eyes wild, expecting him to defend her. She expected her billionaire groom to demand I hand over the money. Vince looked down at the woman he planned to marry tomorrow afternoon. His face was a portrait of absolute horror. The affectionate, polished woman he fell in love with was gone. In her place stood a frantic, cruel extortionist, willing to physically assault her own sister to secure a catering deposit. "Get your hands off her," Vince ordered. His voice was dangerously low, carrying a harsh authority I had not heard from him before. "Vince, make her pay," Brittany pleaded, grabbing his lapels. "She has the money. Tell her to sign the form." Vince peeled her fingers off his suit jacket. He held her wrists, keeping her restrained. He looked at her as if she were a total stranger who had wandered in from the street. The illusion of the elegant, refined Garcia family was dead, and Vince was staring at the rotting corpse. I smoothed the front of my navy dress. I adjusted the strap of my clutch. I did not check my hair. I did not look at the floor. I stood tall in the center of the chaos, projecting the quiet strength I had earned in the quiet isolation of the mountains. I had done my job. I brought the light into the dark room. A sharp, rhythmic tapping sound broke the tension. Tap, tap, tap. The sound originated from the head table. Grandma Helen stood up. She leaned heavily on her silver-handled wooden cane. She navigated around the edge of the long dining table, her movements slow, but possessing a terrifying, deliberate momentum. The crowd of relatives parted for her like the Red Sea. No one dared to speak. Helen stopped a few feet away from where Thomas and Patricia were cowering. My mother was still sobbing into her hands. My father was staring at the forged bank document. Helen slammed the rubber tip of her cane against the hardwood floor. The loud thud commanded the attention of every single person in the room, including Arthur Sterling. "Stand up, Thomas," Helen barked. My father flinched. He slowly raised his head, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked at his mother, searching for a shred of the maternal protection he used to manipulate me with. He found zero mercy in her eyes. "Look at me," Helen demanded. Thomas forced himself to his feet. His knees trembled visibly beneath his rented trousers. Helen surveyed her son and her daughter-in-law, her lips pressed together in a tight, unforgiving line. She did not raise her voice to a scream. She spoke with the practiced, lethal precision of a judge delivering a life sentence. "You two are a disgrace to this family," Helen declared. The words echoed off the glass windows. Patricia let out a fresh whimper, hiding her face deeper into her palms.
I sat in my house for 4 years, listening to your lies.
Helen continued, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. I listened to you tell our friends that Adela lost her mind. I listened to you play the grieving parents. I knew you were hiding her, but I never imagined the sheer depth of your depravity. Helen pointed a weathered finger at the fraud affidavit still clutched in Thomas's hand. You stole her identity, Helen said, making sure the relatives lingering near the buffet heard the specific crime. You bankrupted yourselves, trying to pretend you belonged in this country club, and when the bank cut you off, you forged her name. Thomas opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, but Helen slammed her cane against the floor a second time, silencing him instantly. Do not speak, she ordered. She turned her piercing gaze toward Patricia, then toward Brittany, who was still restrained by Vince. You tried to sell one daughter to buy a dress for the other, Helen stated. The stark, brutal truth of the sentence hung in the air. You decided Adela was nothing more than a bank account, and you decided her child was a shameful secret. You traded your own blood for an open bar and a catering menu. The community jury Patricia relied on to validate her martyrdom had officially turned. Aunt Brenda stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on Helen's shoulder, signaling her allegiance. Uncle Richard turned his back on Thomas, refusing to even look in his direction. The cousins who had posted prayers for my lost soul on social media were now glaring at Brittany with undisguised contempt. The shifting alliances in the room were palpable. Patricia and Thomas had spent decades cultivating a loyal audience by hosting lavish parties and picking up the check. The moment the audience realized the check was paid with stolen funds, the loyalty evaporated. They were socially exiled in real time, standing in the middle of a room filled with people who would never trust them again. Helen turned her head and looked at me. The harshness in her eyes softened for a brief second. She gave me that same slow, respectful nod she offered when I first walked through the oak doors. I had not screamed. I had not thrown a tantrum. I executed a calm, silent dismantling of their empire, and the matriarch of the family approved of the method. The event director's 10-minute deadline was rapidly approaching. The quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed louder now that the screaming had stopped. Arthur Sterling stepped past my ruined father. He walked toward his son. The billionaire executive was done observing. The trial was over, and it was time for the groom's family to deliver the final verdict. Arthur Sterling turned his attention away from my father. He extended his arm and held the manila folder out toward me. His hand was remarkably steady. I reached forward and took the cardboard sleeve, tucking the financial records safely under my arm. The billionaire developer did not offer an apology for the chaotic scene unfolding inside the private dining room. Men who build corporate empires rarely apologize for disasters they did not personally orchestrate. Instead, he delivered a swift, brutal execution of the social contract my parents tried to forge. Arthur shifted his gaze back to Thomas. The polite, conversational tone he used earlier in the evening vanished. His voice dropped into a low, dangerous register that commanded immediate silence. "We are done here, Thomas," Arthur stated. The words struck like a physical blow. My father flinched, his shoulders curling inward, as if trying to shield his body from the impact. Thomas opened his mouth, stammering over his own tongue. He desperately tried to offer a convoluted repayment plan. He promised to liquidate some fictional stock options by Monday morning. He begged for a 24-hour grace period to clear up the misunderstanding. Arthur raised a single index finger, silencing the frantic man instantly. The executive explained that in his world, a bad investment is cut loose the second it shows signs of rot. A forged signature is not a clerical error or a temporary lapse in judgment. It is a severe legal liability. Arthur made it crystal clear that the Sterling family name would never be associated with bank fraud. He severed the connection with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. Arthur then pivoted to face his son. Vince stood rigid on the hardwood floor. The groom looked like a man waking up from a long, confusing nightmare. He stared at the woman he thought he knew, processing the staggering reality of her deception. Arthur placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder, offering a grounding presence amid the wreckage. "Son," Arthur said, his voice echoing across the quiet banquet hall. "We do not merge our bloodline with felons." The word hung in the humid air. Felons. Arthur did not call my parents poor. He did not call them struggling or misguided. He labeled them exactly what the notarized affidavit proved them to be: criminals. Vince took a slow step backward. Brittany saw the distance forming between them. The realization that her billionaire ticket was slipping away fractured her remaining composure. She reached out her hands, grasping at the empty space between them. Vince did not reach back. He reached for the lapels of his custom-tailored suit jacket. He unbuttoned the front, pulled his arms out of the expensive sleeves, and draped the charcoal fabric over the back of an empty wooden chair. The action was highly deliberate. He was physically shedding the role of the groom. He was resigning from the narrative my parents crafted. Brittany dropped to her knees. The white silk of her rehearsal gown pooled around her on the polished floor, catching the spilled red wine near the carving station. She clutched the fabric of Vince's trousers, her knuckles turning white. She begged him to ignore the drama. She pleaded with him to focus on their love story, claiming they could just pay the venue director themselves and banish my parents from their lives forever. She was still trying to salvage her opulent country club future, willing to throw her own mother and father overboard to keep her status. Vince looked down at the weeping woman kneeling at his feet. He saw the naked greed radiating from her posture. He remembered how she tried to physically assault me just moments ago to steal a credit card. The elegant, refined facade she maintained for the past 12 months was stripped away, revealing a hollow, self-serving core. "The wedding is off, Brittany," Vince said. His voice carried zero hesitation. He gently pried her desperate fingers off his pant leg. He turned his back on his bride and walked toward his parents. The Sterling family moved together as a united, impenetrable front. They navigated through the stunned crowd of relatives, heading straight for the heavy oak doors. They walked out of the Red Rock dining room without looking back a single time. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving the Garcia family stranded in the center of their own destruction. The senior event director materialized near the main entrance. She checked her silver wristwatch, her face devoid of any sympathy. The 10-minute grace period had officially expired. She did not approach Thomas to ask for another payment method. She did not offer a secondary warning. She simply raised her right hand and snapped her fingers twice in rapid succession. The waitstaff responded with military efficiency. Waiters in black vests descended upon the dining tables like a swarm of locusts. They did not speak. They picked up the crystal champagne flutes and loaded them onto rolling utility carts. They cleared the untouched plates of expensive appetizers, dumping the gourmet food into plastic disposal bins. A secondary team of workers entered through a side door and began breaking down the elaborate floral centerpieces, ripping the white roses out of their glass vases. The $80,000 reception dissolved right in front of our eyes. The physical dismantling of the illusion happened in real time. The sound of clinking silverware being tossed into plastic tubs replaced the soft jazz music. The workers ignored the crying bride kneeling on the floor. They ignored the stunned relatives. They treated the collapsed wedding as a simple logistics problem that required immediate clearing. Patricia watched the staff dismantle her dream. The adrenaline that fueled her theatrical performance throughout the evening evaporated. Her knees gave out. She collapsed into a high-backed dining chair, her arms dangling uselessly at her sides. Her chest heaved and she let out a raw, guttural wail. This sound was different. This was not the calculated, quiet weeping she used to manipulate her friends at afternoon luncheons. This was the sound of primal fear. Patricia looked around the room. The affluent guests she invited to witness her social triumph were already slipping out the side exits, desperate to avoid any association with the scandal. The country club wives she spent years trying to impress were huddled in small groups near the coat check, whispering furiously and typing on their cell phones. Patricia knew the news of her impending bankruptcy and the forged loan would spread through the wealthy neighborhoods of Scottsdale before sunrise. She was facing total social exile. The iron gates of her elite community were slamming shut, locking her out forever. She was going to have to return to a house that the bank was preparing to seize, stripped of her friends, her status, and her pride. Thomas stood paralyzed near the empty buffet table. He stared at his wife, then looked down at his own trembling hands. The details of the fraud affidavit remained burned into his memory. He realized the loss of the wealthy facade was the least of his impending problems. The collection agency was currently hunting him. The state prosecutors would soon follow. He forged a signature on a commercial banking document, leaving a flawless paper trail that pointed directly to his home address. He possessed zero funds to hire a criminal defense attorney. He was going to lose his freedom. The patriarch of the family was reduced to a terrified suspect awaiting a police knock on his front door. I stood amidst the chaos, watching a waiter roll away a cart filled with expensive linen napkins. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. The contrast between their frantic panic and my internal calm was staggering. 4 years ago, the mere thought of angering my parents sent me into a downward spiral of severe anxiety. I used to lose sleep worrying about their mortgage payments. I sacrificed my own comfort, my own meals, and my own youth to protect their fragile egos. I carried the immense weight of their survival on my shoulders, terrified that one wrong move would destroy our family. Now, watching their fraudulent empire burn to ash, I felt zero guilt. The heavy burden I hauled up the mountain to Flagstaff dissolved into the cool evening air. I did not ruin their lives. They built a house out of matches, soaked it in gasoline, and handed me the lit match. I simply refused to blow it out. I watched my grandmother stand up from the head table. Helen adjusted her silver blazer, grasped her wooden cane, and walked toward the exit without offering her son a single glance of pity. The trial was concluded. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of the desert wind drifting through the open terrace doors. It was time for me to go home to my daughter. I turned on my heel and began walking toward the lobby, leaving the weeping bride and the ruined parents behind in the empty banquet hall. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors leading out of the private banquet hall. The thick carpet of the resort corridor muffled my footsteps. I passed a row of gilded mirrors lining the hallway. I caught a brief glimpse of my own reflection. My posture remained perfectly straight. My grip on the manila folder felt secure. I navigated the grand staircase descending into the main lobby. The space was mostly deserted now. The affluent patrons who witnessed the collapse of my parents had scattered. A single concierge stood behind a marble desk, organizing a stack of brochures. He looked up, his expression guarded, clearly aware that a severe scandal just detonated upstairs. I did not offer him a polite smile. I walked straight past his station and exited through the automatic glass sliding doors. The cool Sedona night air hit my face the moment I stepped onto the pavement. The temperature drops rapidly in the high desert after sunset. The crisp chill felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. The scent of juniper and dry earth replaced the suffocating aroma of expensive perfumes and catered appetizers. I walked toward the valet stand located near the edge of the circular driveway. A young attendant in a white uniform took my claim ticket. He jogged away toward the lower parking tier to retrieve my sedan. I stood alone under the warm glow of a wrought iron street lamp. I looked up at the vast expanse of the Arizona sky. The stars appeared impossibly bright against the pitch-black canopy. The quiet isolation of the mountains welcomed me back. I felt the adrenaline slowly draining from my muscles. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, inhaling the scent of the pine trees bordering the resort property. The heavy burden I dragged around for the last half-decade felt physically lifted from my shoulders. The meticulous planning, the hidden bank transfers, the forged signature, the elaborate lies told to our extended relatives, all of it was exposed. The poison was drawn out of the wound. I knew I could finally return to Flagstaff and raise Mia in a world entirely free of their toxic influence. The peaceful silence shattered abruptly. The automatic glass doors behind me hissed open with a loud mechanical whine. The frantic, unmistakable sound of high heels striking concrete echoed across the driveway. Someone was running. I did not need to turn around to identify the pursuer. My mother burst out of the resort lobby. Patricia was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she sprinted toward the valet stand. The theatrical sorrow she displayed inside the dining room was gone. She no longer played the role of the weeping, victimized matriarch. The wealthy audience had abandoned her. Arthur Sterling was gone. The billionaire safety net evaporated. Because the spectators had vanished, Patricia dropped the mask. She closed the distance between us, her face contorted with a raw, feral rage. She lost her grip on reality. The valet attendant pulled my vehicle up to the curb, placed the vehicle in park, and stepped out. He took one look at the enraged woman charging toward us and wisely retreated toward his podium. Patricia stopped a few feet away from my rear bumper. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You destroyed this family!" she screamed. Her voice tore through the quiet night, hoarse and desperate. She did not care who heard her outside the building. "You owe us for raising you. You owe us for putting clothes on your back and food in your mouth. You selfish, ungrateful child!" She hurled the accusations like jagged rocks attempting to inflict maximum emotional damage. She expected me to flinch. She expected me to absorb the guilt of my childhood obligations. She believed the biological fact of giving birth granted her a lifetime pass to steal my labor and commit bank fraud. I placed my hand on the driver's side door handle. I stopped my forward momentum. I did not get into the vehicle immediately. I turned around to fully face the woman who erased my existence for 4 years. I stared into her frantic eyes. My voice emerged cold, clinical, and precise. I did not yell over her screaming. I forced her to listen to the quiet truth. "I did not destroy this family," I said. "I just stopped funding your illusion." I watched her jaw tremble as the words struck her. "You did not lose a daughter, Mom. You lost a checking account." The undeniable truth of that statement hung in the cold air between us. She never mourned my absence. She never missed my company. She never once asked about the grandchild she knew existed. She only missed the automated clearinghouse transfers that kept the foreclosure notices at bay. She only missed the financial cushion that allowed her to drink martinis at the country club and boast about fictional investments. I raised the reinforced cardboard folder slightly, letting the ambient light illuminate the legal documents inside. The heavy cardboard contained the exact coordinates of her impending downfall. "And tomorrow morning," I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper, "you are going to lose your freedom when I hand this folder to the police." I watched the profound shift occur in her physical posture. The blinding rage evaporated, instantly replaced by a suffocating wave of genuine terror. The reality of the forged signature finally sank into her brain. She realized I was not bluffing. She realized the notarized fraud affidavit carried the weight of a state prison sentence. She understood that white-collar crime held severe penalties, and she possessed zero capital to hire a defense attorney. The wealthy friends she relied on for favors were currently fleeing the banquet hall, eager to distance themselves from a public scandal. Patricia gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The manic energy drained from her limbs. Her knees buckled under the crushing weight of impending criminal charges. She collapsed onto the hard asphalt right next to the rear tire of my sedan. She fell to the ground, scraping her bare knees against the rough pavement. She began to beg. She wept openly, pleading for mercy. She promised to pay the money back. She swore she would find a job and make things right. She begged me not to send my own father to jail. I looked down at the sobbing woman crawling on the asphalt. I did not feel a single shred of sympathy. I did not stay to listen to the apologies. Her remorse was entirely synthetic. She was not sorry for stealing my identity or erasing her granddaughter. She was only sorry she got caught. Her apologies were born entirely from the fear of consequences. I opened my car door. I slid into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut, cutting off the sound of her frantic pleading. I pressed the lock button. The heavy locks engaged with a solid, satisfying click. I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, the headlights illuminating the dark driveway. I shifted the gear into drive and pressed the accelerator, leaving my mother alone in the dark. 7 days passed since my tires left the resort pavement in Sedona. The passage of time felt different now. The frantic, ticking clock that governed my entire adult life finally stopped. A brilliant Sunday morning broke across the San Francisco peaks. The high-elevation air carried a sharp, clean chill that made my lungs feel alive. I sat on the wooden steps of my front porch in Flagstaff. I wore a thick gray cardigan over my pajamas. The fabric felt soft and warm against the cold mountain wind. Mia sat right beside me on the wooden planks. She kicked her feet against the lower step, humming a quiet, unidentifiable tune. She held a plastic fork in her small fist, carefully drowning a stack of buttermilk pancakes in amber maple syrup. The neighborhood remained profoundly quiet. No shouting echoed from the driveway. No panicked phone calls interrupted our breakfast. We heard only the sound of wind brushing through the towering ponderosa pines bordering our street. My cell phone sat on the porch railing. The screen remained blank and silent. I had permanently blocked every phone number associated with Maricopa County except for one. The crunch of gravel broke the morning silence. A silver sedan turned onto my street and slowed to a halt at the edge of my driveway. The driver's side door swung open. Grandma Helen stepped out onto the pavement. She wore a thick wool sweater over her tailored slacks, adjusting her wardrobe to the mountain climate. She opened her rear passenger door and hauled a worn cardboard box out of the back seat. She refused my verbal offer to help carry the load. She marched up the concrete walkway, her wooden cane tapping a steady, rhythmic cadence alongside her heavy footsteps. Mia looked up from her sticky plate, her syrup-covered cheeks stretching into a wide grin. Helen set the cardboard box down on the porch floorboards and took a seat on the woven wicker chair facing the street. I stood up and poured my grandmother a mug of black coffee from the insulated steel thermos resting on the patio table. She took a slow sip. Her sharp eyes scanned the quiet street, absorbing the peace I built with my own hands. She nudged the cardboard box toward my feet with the rubber tip of her cane. The flaps were folded over, securing the contents inside. I paid a visit to the Scottsdale property before the bank changed the locks, Helen said, her voice dry and pragmatic. I found a plastic storage bin shoved into the darkest corner of their attic. I knelt on the porch boards and opened the box. My parents had hidden David's personal belongings. They kept his favorite faded denim jacket, a collection of his physical therapy textbooks, and his silver watch. Patricia concealed them under a layer of old winter coats, likely planning to throw them into a dumpster to erase any physical trace of my past. Helen rescued every single item. I reached into the cardboard and pulled out the silver watch. The metal felt ice cold against my palm. The glass face featured a tiny scratch near the 3 o'clock mark. I remembered the exact day he bumped his wrist against a door frame and caused that scratch. I showed the timepiece to my daughter. I told Mia it belonged to her father. Mia put her fork down. She reached out and ran her small thumb over the glass dial. A profound sense of closure settled over my chest. David was finally in our home, safe from the people who refused to acknowledge his existence. Helen leaned back in the wicker chair and delivered the final ledger. The justice was swift, brutal, and entirely legal. She laid out the exact sequence of events following the canceled wedding reception. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office received my certified affidavit on Monday morning. 2 detectives wearing plain clothes visited the Scottsdale property on Tuesday afternoon. They knocked on the custom mahogany door and asked Thomas very specific questions regarding a fraudulent signature. Thomas was currently under a formal criminal investigation for financial fraud. He possessed no legal defense and no money to hire private counsel. The local bank seized the 5-bedroom estate by Thursday afternoon. They nailed a neon green foreclosure notice directly onto the front door. The country club board of directors convened an emergency meeting later that evening. They voted unanimously to revoke Patricia and Thomas's membership, citing a strict violation of their moral clauses. The wealthy neighbors who once drank their imported wine now crossed the street to avoid walking past their unkempt lawn. The social exile was absolute. Brittany faced a harsh new reality. Vincent severed all contact immediately. He blocked her phone number and instructed his corporate security team to turn her away from all Sterling properties. Stripped of her billionaire safety net and her parents' fraudulent funding, Brittany was forced to sign a lease on a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment near a noisy industrial park. Helen described watching Brittany haul cheap cardboard moving boxes up a flight of exterior concrete stairs. She was furious and alone, blaming everyone except herself for the collapse of her fairy tale. She lost the extravagant wedding, the wealthy groom, and the endless stream of cash she took for granted. My mother and father relocated to a budget motel on the dusty outskirts of the city. They were currently scraping together loose cash to pay for single nights while waiting for the legal hammer to drop. The illusion was dead. The empire of lies was reduced to a pile of unpaid bills, locked doors, and impending court summons. I listened to the report without interrupting. The reality of their situation was staggering yet entirely predictable. When you build a house on a foundation of lies, you cannot act surprised when the roof caves in. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindictive glee. I did not feel the urge to call the budget motel and gloat over their ruin. My revenge was not about their suffering. My revenge was securing my own freedom. I felt a profound, untouchable peace. The toxic roots were permanently severed. The poison could no longer reach the soil where I planted my life. My grandmother finished her black coffee. She set the ceramic mug down on the table, leaned over, and kissed Mia on the forehead. She stood up, grabbed her wooden cane, and promised to return for Thanksgiving dinner. I watched her silver sedan pull out of the driveway and disappear down the road, leaving us to our perfect isolation. I stood up from the wooden steps. I walked into the garage and retrieved a metal paint can and 2 wooden brushes. The color inside the can matched the exact shade of the sky on a clear summer afternoon. I carried the supplies to the edge of the driveway. Our metal mailbox looked faded and weathered from the harsh mountain winters. I used a flathead screwdriver to pry the metal lid off the paint can. I handed the smaller wooden brush to my daughter. We dipped our bristles into the blue liquid. We started painting the metal covering up the rust spots and the old scratches. The rhythmic motion of the brush against the steel felt like a meditation. The smooth blue paint transformed the worn metal into something bright and new. My life belonged to me. My labor belonged to me. Every dollar in my bank account served a purpose I chose. Nobody could force my hand again. Nobody could demand my signature to fund a lie. I stepped back and looked at the wet paint drying in the morning sun. Then I turned away from the mailbox. I looked directly into the camera lens, looking past the digital screen to every single person watching this story unfold. I know some of you are sitting at a kitchen table right now, staring at a dwindling bank statement. I know you are wondering how you are going to afford basic groceries next week because you just drained your savings to pay a relative's past due electric bill. I know the heavy, sickening guilt they use to keep your wallet open. I know how they twist the word family into a weapon designed to extract your labor. You lie awake at night, calculating how many overtime shifts you need to work just to cover a debt you did not create. You convince yourself that being a good daughter, a good son, or a good sibling requires setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. Hear this truth and let it sink into your bones. If they need your money to love you, they don't love you. They are just charging you rent to stay in their lives. Stop paying. I turned back to the mailbox. Mia giggled as a tiny drop of blue paint splattered onto the toe of her canvas shoe. I knelt down and wiped the blue smear away with my thumb. The bright blue metal stood out sharply against the deep green pine trees bordering our yard. It was a clear, unmistakable boundary line. It was a bright beacon, signaling a life beautifully, quietly, and firmly defended.